Before we start, I want to give some props to Councillor Stephen Holiday, who taught me the importance of props when speaking at City Hall. So here I've got two cups, right? Each cup is meant to represent a budget serving a population. The water inside these cups represent funds. Now, the larger the population, you might have a larger cup. When you have a smaller population, you might have a smaller cup. We're talking wards, we're talking cities, whatever. Now, if I drink this cup, I drink 3/4 of it, and there's 25% left. I drink this cup, and there's 0% left. You might say, Dan, you drank more water out of this cup, but this one is now empty. And when we talk about budgets for a large growing city, what I think is important is not to look at the absolute figures, $1 million this, $1 million that, but the fact that budgets need to grow with populations that grow. And what you're doing with the budget allocation in your ward or your city relative to the population of that city, relative to inflation, relative to all the rising costs of working in Toronto is important. Is there money left over at the end or not? Is there something inappropriate happening with that money or not? People are allowed to spend money within their budgets. You've heard today from a speaker who's using that absolute value of $1 million as a threshold for excessive spending, ignoring whether or not that absolute number was a waste relative to what was budget. Sure, $1 million seems like a lot of money, but what are we really doing here? If we look instead at what was allocated and overages, according to consultant Brittany Ford, for instance, we get a different picture. Using that metric, Nunziata, Mantas, and Bradford come out looking worse. Looking specifically at office expenditure limits, according to journalist Matt Elliott, Nunziata, Malik, Perusa come closest to reaching that limit. Close, but importantly, again, not over. If we're talking about waste, I would argue that cherry-picking figures to turn this very mundane item into a debate, long-winded debate, is quite wasteful. Considering the hourly wages of the folks in the room right now, each 5-minute deputation costs, based on the salaries of the folks here, approximately $315 for 15 minutes, which is the lowest the Harvard Business Review can go. So we'll divide that by 3. This is costing about $100 for me to talk to you for 5 minutes. So if I'm farming social media clips or doing what have you to elongate this debate, each time I come up here is costing money. The importance of deputation should be preserved no matter what. I believe it's worth the costs. But if we're talking about waste, what is waste? What's a deputation that actually makes sense versus one that's just being used for social media clout or not really progressing the debate at all? Instead, let's look at how funds were spent. For instance, Brad Bradford spent a pittance, $250, one might say, on a podcasting coach to launch a podcast that then talked about the city at large and arguably helped solidify his position as someone running for mayor of a whole city. Not really clear how that promotional cost helped specifically his ward and his constituents. Hours spent recording a podcast, just $250, but still an expense nonetheless, and something that we could classify as waste even if it doesn't show up as a budget line item. Similarly, if we look at transportation expenses versus council attendance, I can understand spending a lot of money getting around town if you are then going to show up for every council meeting. But for instance, Michael Thompson spent over $6,100 driving around and then was absent for 22% of votes. So where was he? I'm going to shout out my boy Holiday again, and for those of you who know me, as you leave, you might want to look for flying pigs in the sky because I don't give him praise often, but the guy expensed no travel and he missed no votes. My ask is simple. While the way that this information is presented is a little bit opaque, it allows people to cherry pick figures for their own political means. And I would really love it if the executive committee could actually maximize transparency and put maximum daylight on these issues. Working with open data, creating a dashboard so that people can see these expenses relative to one another and to decide on their own merits with one cost versus another, with the population size, with all of these figures in a nuanced and actually presentable way, because it's difficult to read the documents as they are, you might actually be able to defang some folks who are perhaps presenting data for their own means. In the meantime, canadaspends.com has a very interesting dashboard that, while I can't speak to its accuracy or if its efficacy, the presentation of it, the simplicity of it is exactly what I'm talking about. This is a means for regular citizens to hold councillors accountable without having to go through third parties who might be using this information to present a very specific story and very specific data points. Thank you for your time.